a second phase of rules coming in. So it's slightly different from the original contest, the contest that started from November to end of December. In this new contest, there's some of the rules have slightly changed as well as prize pool. So just go take a look at that over at the Collider Query DB page and click on the contest rules. You'll be able to view all that information. So uh, please be aware of that. We're still going through and triaging as many queries as we can. So if you guys have written queries, I know some of you guys have reached out to me. Please, thank you for your patience, and we'll get to it as soon as we can. Seen some really good queries, so appreciate that as well. And finally, if you guys have any questions about duplicates, if you're writing a query you think is a duplicate, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Or we also have a list inside of our Discord channel that provides a list of all the submitted queries as of a couple of days ago. So you'll get a pretty comprehensive list to see if a query has been submitted or not. And I think that will really help you and prevent you from having to submit a duplicate, which is not a fun process, especially when you think it's an original. I think we're gonna give one more minute. And by the way, this is going to be recorded on YouTube, so if you guys can't watch the whole thing, please check out our YouTube channel where we have this recording as well as all of our previous interviews and events there as well. And you can check that out at Remedy XYZ at YouTube. That's our channel name. So check that out as well. All right, I'd say let's get started. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another Discord Remedy event. Today, we're going to be talking to Antonio, uh, who is a security engineer or security researcher at Recon. And many of you probably have seen him on Twitter as I can never pronounce it. It's AVVI. I think maybe you could finish the spelling for me.
Yeah, it is Antonio Villano, so a contraction of Antonio, then my last name.
Got
It
it.
doesn't have a real
You could
meaning. It's just my name, but contracted.
no, it's totally good call.
Yeah.
You don't want to name yourself something like "thank you" and then have everybody get confused.
Yeah.
um, so welcome, Antonio. It's a real pleasure to have you. I wanted to set up this event to talk to you because you're a very interesting security researcher. You spend, I think, a lot of your time on security tooling, in particular fuzz tests. That's sort of my understanding, and I was really interested to see what work you're going to be doing on Glider, and I think you did a really good job at a query you submitted, and so I think that's really why I wanted to have this conversation with you, try to pick your brain and understand how you think about things.
Yeah, sure. So, hello everyone. Thanks for joining. And yeah, so just a quick intro about myself. For those who don't know me, I am I've been working in Web3 security for the past 3 years or so. Um, Before that, I was a Solidity developer doing Web3 games, and then I decided that I wanted to learn more about security. So I joined this side and started to study and research, and then I started to specialize in fuzz tests. Um, because I've always been a big fan of automation, and I think this is a good way to automate finding bugs, basically. Um, I'm currently also working at Rio, which is a DeFi protocol, a lending marketplace, and trying to prevent bugs there and trying to avoid mistakes, basically. So yeah, so I joined the Glider contest. My primary motivation was actually to learn how to use the tool. So I'm not really trying to score number one, get to the leaderboard. I just wanted to learn it because I think it's a great tool for your toolkit as a security researcher. And And I think the contest is a great way to do that. You can at the same time learn, find bugs, get paid. I think it's the best thing you can ask for as a researcher. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's great motivation. What what did you like most about Glider when you first started using it?
Yeah, I think I really liked the vision. First of all, I don't remember his name, but it was the CEO of Hexens who posted that you would own a bug. I don't remember his
Mhm.
name, but basically the vision that you can encode the vulnerability that you are always finding and you are always reporting on the same contests, on the same audits that you're doing, and now you can permanently find the same issues on mainnet basically. So this was very powerful to me, and I think and this can also be very helpful to really save live funds and save users because you can kind of prevent those bugs at scale instead of having to rely on a single audit by audit. You can turn this into a very powerful monitoring solution.
Yeah, I think that is a like that's one of my favorite things about Glider. Even more specifically is just the repository of contracts that we have. I think
Yeah.
that's really hard to find in other tooling. Most tooling is focused on an individual like protocol or scope, and so I think there's just difficulty in finding bugs at scale when you have a tool that only works on a single contract.
hmm Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. By the way, guys, don't hesitate to post any questions in chat. We'll get to it when we get a chance. So, like, okay, so you check out Glider. What is the very first query that you decide to write?
Sorry, can you repeat, please? I had
Oh
a
yeah, sure.
issue with my
So,
mic.
so if this is you check out Glider, you like it, and you decide to write your
Yeah.
first query. What is that first query that you write?
Oh yeah. So I think I started from the tutorial. I think the documentation was really good, and I tried to follow some of the examples that it had on the UI to
Hmm.
understand and then tweak those examples to find different stuff. But then after I was past the first examples, my first query was to try to find a very simple safe transfer bug, like the token wasn't using transfer or safe transfer. And I think this was even reported by someone in the contest already. And I thought this was, yeah, I was just trying to validate my understanding from the documentation in a live query, but I was not trying to submit it to the contest because I thought the impact wouldn't be as high as possible. Because usually only some very exceptional tokens fall into that category, and and you also it also depends if the protocol is using those tokens at all. Yeah, so my primary motivation was impact. So yeah, so I did implement a safe transfer uh, uh, a query, but
Hmm.
I didn't want to polish it. You see what I mean? So I was like, okay, so I know how this works. Let's move on to the next query, which was the one that I submitted, which was the permissionless call.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting approach. I don't know, I think that's how I started when I first worked on Glider was I would write a very basic query that maybe wasn't really perfect, and then I would aim to like write another as soon as fast as possible. I mean, I think I even like skipped some triaging where I skipped like the results and looking at the results and just focused on like how do I get really good at writing Glider queries? How can I do it with ease and not have to really look at the documentation? I think that was my goal, and it's really interesting to see you also do that as well, where you're more primary focused on the impact and just learning at the documentation, learning how to use Glider.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's probably the best I would definitely deep dive a bit more in the documentation if I were actively bug counting, because I think having it as like a second nature would definitely allow me to write better queries and write better POC queries instead of having to rely too much on searching the docs. So yeah, so like what I want to say is that for bug hunters, I think, yeah, spending more time on the docs is very positive. But in my case, I was not actively bug hunting. I just wanted to learn. So I would go back and forth, docs, then Python code, then docs and Python code. Then I also pasted all the documentation into ChatGPT at one point to help me
Mhm.
have yeah, to get help easier, basically. And this helped me build a query and then validate it, etc. But I still feel that I don't have a very good understanding of all the features because there are many features. Uh, so which I think is a better way to do this if you are hunting for bugs, for live bugs. I think my approach was really to learn, not really to like go after the live bugs on mainnet. But I think if you are trying to find bugs on mainnet, I think, yeah, getting very acquainted to the documentation is probably better.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's a very interesting balance too. You know, you could really go far down the rabbit hole and learn every feature. I think what happened for me was I realized that there are some things in Glider I just rarely use and some things I use often. And I learned those things I used often. I really tried to get really good at that first, and then focus on the more niche stuff. I think it also depends on like the query you're right too, like the query bug you're looking for. It directly impacts what you're using in Glider.
Hmm.
So you sort of answered this a little bit, but what are some of the key lessons that you learned while working with Glider?
Hmm. Well, I think the first lesson I learned was really from the documentation when I was understanding the different entities that you could use on your query. You have like functions, instructions, you have contracts, et cetera, et cetera. And I think this was a bit yeah, eye-opening to me because I think I never thought of Solidity contracts this way. And what I could understand is how the Glide developers they created basically the database, the abstraction behind the Solidity contract.
Mhm,
And I think this is similar to, for example, what Slither does for the
mhm,
intermediate representation of
mhm,
contracts, so that it can generate detectors and automate some detectors. It's a bit different, and I think Glider's division is a bit more high level. It seemed to me, and it's closer to what you as a developer or a Solidity developer or as a security researcher is usually familiar with. So it was easier to understand the abstraction from Glider. That's what I wanted to say. And 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 then I tried to understand what types of functions were applicable to each entity. So you have a contract name, you have divisibility, um, you have a bunch of functions that are applied at each entity. Yeah, and it was a fun process to try to really kind of try to reverse engineer how this was all built.
yeah, that's I did that when I first started too, and it was a very interesting and fun experience. I learned a lot of really interesting edge cases about Glider that I think really carried over to all the work that I've been able to do with it. Um, so you know, if you're starting from scratch, like I kind of want to talk about your query that you submitted,
Mhm.
and just kind of not necessarily the details of the query, like you know. Like the how it's written, but like what was the idea behind that query? What made you think that this was a really good query to write?
Yeah. So I think as I was briefly mentioning during the introduction, I had my kind of two goals for joining the contest. First one was to learn about Glider, and second one was to maximize impact. And and then I had a few ideas. So yes, like just by looking at into some critical bugs that often appear in audits or contests, I would I started to think about some of those bugs, some critical bugs, and I really liked one type of bug that I had actually experienced myself as a user. Like I developed a liquidation bot contract that I wanted to integrate with uh, some protocols, and then it had a very complex chain of yeah of methods basically. And one of those methods, it would be called, one of those methods had uh, uh, a conditional execution based on the contract deployer, which was myself. And as a concept, so what I mean is that you could trigger one of those paths and execute an arbitrary call in this contract if you would pass a very specific sequence of parameters. And
Mhm.
and then someone did this, and basically I lost like 1,000 bucks basically that I had approved to this contract to
Mm.
do these liquidations. And yeah, this was like obviously sad, but I was just a test thing, so it was fine. So I tried to reproduce this same bug in Glider. So my idea was try to find uh, a path from a public function or external function that would lead to an arbitrary call. And I think this is, yeah, you probably have a lot of critical bugs, but this is one of the most critical bugs you can have, because like it obviously depends on where, like what access this contract has. But if it is holding funds, you can steal all funds. If it is interacting with other protocols, you can call those protocols in unexpected manners, for example.
Mhm.
And I think this is like something that you learn on Solidity 101. Yeah, you just put the only owner modifier to make sure you don't allow someone to call your function. So I was trying to find this bug, and yeah, so my goal was to find a code path that would lead to an arbitrary execution from an external function. And I ran into some limitations, basically because my query, it was too generic, so I would find lots of contracts and lots of false positives. So I had to fine tune it and make it more specific, and
Mhm.
and then also apply some filters to reduce the search space from Glider to be able to manually review the impact. Because after finding the contract and making sure that the query works, because this was the first approach, making sure that the query works. The second step was to make sure that the impact was critical, that that there were live funds at stake, and and then I don't know, maybe try to also submit a bug bounty with the help of Glider. Um, and this second step was very difficult, because then I had to go over, use like a bunch of different tools, right? Like either scan, make sure that this contract had funds, or maybe is this a protocol that has a bug bounty program, or et cetera, et cetera. So I also had the second phase of triaging the candidates after I fine-tuned the query.
You brought up some very interesting points in your response. So, what I really like about your query too is that it's not, I think there's like, you could, bugs could come in a range, right? You could have really simple mistakes where you forget a simple modifier, or you hard code something when you shouldn't. I think those are like very simple bugs. And then on the other side of the coin, you have I'd say slightly more complex vulnerabilities that requires a lot of auditors' eyes on it, so to speak, where it's not super obvious. You have to walk through the contract to understand what's going on in the code, and then hopefully identify that vulnerability. And what I like about your query, maybe this is debatable, is that I think it's something where a developer can make a mistake and it's not so obvious
Mhm,
when you allow like an arbitrary input that eventually reaches a low level call. That's
mhm,
not a very instinctual thing. You could have user input that could flow through different functions that can, um, be modified and worked on. So what I like about your query is that it attempts to identify these vulnerabilities that I think sometimes developers know, but sometimes they don't.
mhm,
Whereas if you have a function that is doing like let's say it's doing like a safe transfer, or let's say it's calling transferring ERC tokens, and it's not validating the return value, the success return value. That's like a really simple mistake, and I think at this day it's kind of solidity 101. But your query sort of handles that in a little bit more complex way. I like that a lot. I appreciate that a lot. I think
mhm,
those type of queries will likely find more impactful vulnerabilities.
mhm,
Um, the second thing that you had mentioned that I thought was really interesting was I kind of lost my train of thought on it now, but um, when you were working on the query and you're trying to triage, uh, I think it's a common issue for a lot of people who are writing queries to when they run it, they'll find a lot of duplicates. And I've seen two approaches that contributors do. Either they still submit the query, which is fine.
mhm,
I think for every query there's going to be false positives. Um, but then there's others like you who decided to make it a little bit more precise. I think that's also very important, especially if you're looking for bug bounties, because the reality is most of the time, if you're looking at a lot of duplicate contracts, they either all have the vulnerability or they don't. And if you could uh, get that out of your results, I think you're faster to finding a vulnerability in the wild. And that's I think that's a very important thing. Time is very important when it comes to triaging glider queries.
mhm. Yeah, I think that's definitely where I spend the most time on, because it was like I saw it as a two-step process where I would need to
Mhm.
fine-tune my query and then make sure that my target was had a big impact, like a critical impact that I could yeah, that it would have funds or something like that. And then I had to I was trying to do both at the same time. So yeah, maybe let me add a little another modifier filter, or maybe let me filter by visibility, or maybe etc etc. So try to make the query more specific. But I was also at the same time trying to go for some candidates and just go over the source code and sorry, on either scan it, and then see the project deployer, see if they had a bug bounty, see if they had something, what funds they were holding. And this was a very manual process, just because this was a manual process, just because I only wanted to have a good uh, um, a good submission for the contest. So I wanted to have a good report that it would be clearly, yeah, where the impact would be clear. I would run my POC, I would steal funds, I would, in the fork environment, and then I would submit the POC basically. So this was my goal. But I also think that everything in this whole process can be automated, which I think it's where the power lives. You can you can optimize your query if you have like a benchmark of contracts. So yeah, so for example, you could create the I forgot the name, but on Glider you can create some, yeah, you can create
Custom scope.
another. Oh yeah, scope. So I could create a benchmark scope with a bunch of contracts and then my vulnerable contracts, and then I could create a benchmark script that would just execute my query on those scope and try to filter it and narrow it down. And then I could have other scripts that would automatically check for whether the project deployer had a bug bounty program, or whether which tokens were vulnerable, how was the TVL, etc. So I think everything can eventually be automated, and I think Glider stands in a very good uh, like it's like a piece over on a yeah on a that can be basically connected to other pieces. So you run Glider, you run your checks, you run your whatever, and then you narrow down, and maybe you run your AI auditing tool that you're using. I don't know. So and eventually you get to very high true positives and very high impact. And this is what I was trying to do and try to conceive basically. But I was doing this manually.
Yeah, no, that's I think we share that vision too on our end of trying to get this to where it's something that is definitely a part of the toolkit, developer toolkit, and has, very high success rate at identifying vulnerabilities once you understand what that vulnerability is and you're wanting to look for it in the chain, which is, I think, like I don't think there's any other tool that really can do that on the level that Glider can.
hmm Yeah, I don't think so.
Um, yeah. So you mentioned a little bit about using AI, and you used it really, I think, to try to understand documentation more. Was there anything else you used AI for in your query writing
Um,
process?
Mostly on understanding the documentation and helping me write the query. But this was it, I think, because in my case, I already knew more or less how to construct the um, the path to find the bug. So I would only ask like ChatGPT, yeah, I need a function that does this, and then like how's the syntax? Uh, or maybe I'm getting too many I don't know, like interfaces or libraries as results. Help me filter those. And I used it mostly as a way to navigate through the docs. Um,
Mm,
but I also think that, yeah, some people could use it to build the queries from scratch. If you have like a list of ideas, you could just use the docs to run the docs through the AI to build the query, and then you manually validate if the query is valid.
yeah, I'm generally a proponent of that. I do think that works. For sure. I think sometimes when you start using it to edit your queries that already work, I've seen that's where it gets a little funky sometimes. So yeah, absolutely. Like if you guys have an idea for a query and you want to use AI to help write the baseline for it, go for it. Because there's in the documentation, I don't know how often contributors are. I have to imagine they're using it often. Every function that we have has an example. So that you could use that to feed to an AI to say, "Hey, here's all these examples from this documentation." And from that documentation examples, build out a foundational query that looks for XYZ. That is
Mhm.
that's totally possible. I encourage people to do that. Um, are there any tools or workflows or tricks that you want to share with the community? To help them write queries, whether that's for the query contest, the glider contest, or for bug bounty hunting.
Mm, well, I think other than a coding agent, I didn't use anything. But I was thinking about using an existing list of detectors to build glider queries, which is probably what some participants are doing, because I like you have a lot of pre-built uh, queries in like Slither or
Mhm.
Analyzer, or other static analyzers that already exist out there. And I think some of those they have a high true positive rate, and I would start from those. Like maybe try to find some true positive rate detectors from existing analyzers if they are, especially if they are not submitted. Yeah, obviously, and then try to encode those in Glider, because I think you can really find some stuff on mainnet, even though Slider exists for, I don't know, 5 years. I think some projects still don't use it, so you can probably find the same bugs on a few different deployed contracts.
Yeah, and I also know that so they're well, don't correct me on I could be wrong, but I believe they've added additional queries over time too.
Yes,
So
yes, there are some, and also some other teams added queries using Slider as a dependency, like the pessimistic audit team. They added a few. They
mhm,
have a few queries that depend on Slider. They are yeah, uh, and yeah, and then so, like participants, they can also look into those as a source of inspiration, I think.
yeah, absolutely. That's a great place to go to. So I have like one more question for you, and it's something I think every contributor deals with, including myself. So when a query doesn't work as expected, what's your typical debugging process?
Mhm. Mm. Yeah, so this is a hard one because I don't know if I have a good recommendation, because my debugging process was to try to read the docs better. Like sometimes I would ask the AI to, yeah, help me with this function, and then it would give me a piece of code, and then maybe it didn't work, so I would go down and read the docs myself and try to really understand the concepts that it was using, uh, and what were the entities that it was using, uh, and try to sometimes rephrase my query. This helped a lot. Like I think there are multiple ways you can find the same bug, because
Mhm.
all the entities, they are connected to each other. Like functions, they have instructions, and contracts have functions, etc. So sometimes you are thinking about looking for functions, but if you could look for instructions, maybe you can find the same stuff. So this is something that I try to also play with. Yeah, use different, try to create a different query to find the same bug, and this would sometimes help me go past through the limitations.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I know I've done that before, and what's interesting, I think, is I think after I rewrote it, and it ended up being a better query than the original.
Mhm.
Maybe it's just less bloated, and maybe I just had understood things more. I think that's like a really good idea. Okay,
Yeah.
so I kind of let people ask me questions, mainly just because I'm a contest triager, and maybe I have some insight into Glider that somebody else doesn't have. Do you have any questions for me?
Yeah, I think I have a question about the triaging process, because you've been looking at a bunch of queries from the inside. Um, and I think my first question is, how are you seeing these two possible ways of participating in the contest, where one is trying to yeah, start with simple queries where maybe you already have them on static analyzers, and then just
Mhm.
transpiling them to Glider. So this could be a strategy. But there's another strategy is where you try to find mainnet bugs and high impact bugs. And maybe you have more trouble with triaging the bugs yourself, but maybe you actually find something critical. Do you see lots of participants doing simple queries first, or is that, or do they, or more participants are trying to find critical bugs? How are you seeing this type of participation in the contest?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I see both. I see I think what I see is a lot of people writing simple bugs, but they're sometimes overcomplicating it.
Mhm.
Like I'll say this, like, we don't have an expectation for the query to be a complete end-to-end verification of a vulnerability. Now, a lot of times you can do that with Glider, and we try to push for that, but that's not always the case. And so sometimes we'll have very simple vulnerabilities that I think the query is maybe just too complex. It's maybe doing too much. And so what that does is you get a lot of results. You've done a lot of work on the query, but you're just not going to have a lot of time to triage. And
Hmm.
so you kind of have to contend. That's like a downside of writing simple queries if you're a beginner. If you're more experienced, you could write very simple. When I say simple queries, I mean queries that look for very simple vulnerabilities. Um, like you could look at like I'd say a good chunk of that is on the query database that exists right now that's written by me is usually very common vulnerabilities.
Hmm.
So I see some of that. On the other hand, I see, the more submissions that a triager makes, the more I see them trying to look for more impactful vulnerabilities, which is really good. The downside to that is that you're going to have less results, and it's just going to be harder to find a actual bug vulnerability in the wild. You sometimes you have to contend with the fact of whether or not it has a bug bounty program at all if you do find a vulnerability, and so that's the other aspect to it. So I see both. I see a lot of simple queries in the beginning. If you understand Glider, I just think a natural tendency is if you really understand Glider, you understand documentation, your queries will naturally lean more towards being impactful because you understand how Glider works and you can write a query that looks for a more abstract vulnerability versus a very specific and narrow vulnerability that maybe you're doing through grep checks. And I've had a lot of opinions on grep checks. They're
Hmm.
usually very specific, very narrow, but there's better ways to do it with Glider. Um,
Hmm.
hopefully I answered your question. It's very interesting because you get both, and then some people have natural tendencies to always write impactful bugs. Some just want to write very basic bugs, and we accept them all. Um, I won't. I'm fine with either one.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Makes sense. Makes sense.
I
Awesome.
think one other thing I would say is that impactful bugs are it's a very interesting game because I've tried to look for very impactful vulnerabilities and I found none. I mean, I've had that experience before, um, and that kind of sucks. But the really nice thing is if you want to be if you're persistent and you want to keep running that query, you can, and eventually one day somebody will probably submit that a contract that has that vulnerability. So impactful bugs I think are a persistent long term long gain pursuit, whereas simple bugs are more just in the moment. You're going to get a lot of results,
Hmm.
and if you keep running it over time, you're going to get more and more and more results. So, how you want to spend your time is that simple bugs you're going to find that somebody's probably likely reported on it. Impactful bugs that are maybe a little bit more complex, it's you're going to find. I think you'll find a greater chance of finding a real world vulnerability that you can report on and
Hmm.
get paid for.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Totally.
Any other questions?
No, I think this was my only question. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Antonio, I greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining and talking and me getting a chance to pick your brain. As everybody knows, we record this on YouTube. I think most of our audience is on YouTube. So uh, thank you guys here at Discord and YouTube for checking us out and listening to this interview. If there's no other questions, then I will wrap it up. Just a quick heads up, guys. Contest is still ongoing, and you can still submit queries. We are going through all of these submissions. Thank you for your patience. I know some of you guys have been waiting for a bit, but we will get to it. We promise. And just be on the lookout on Discord for any new updates for the glider contest. Um, and Antonio, where can we find you?
Yeah. Uh, so I'll be on on this server, Discord server, obviously, but you can also follow me on Twitter. It's the same handle, aviggiano with double G. And yeah, if you want to chat about your queries or anything, please reach out.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for attending. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone. See you.
Have a good one.
See
Bye-bye.
you.